Det här är en fågel!
Fy fas och pignalen.
Örkelön, seneskofte!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse. This time it is a Tuesday edition and it's a slightly impromptu stream, but we'll do our best to talk about all the usual things we talk about, be it politics, art, culture, or philosophy, all of course with a true right and Nordic perspective. Initially, this was supposed to be on Wednesday this week because I am going away this week. And then because there's a strike going on with some, is it flight technicians, people who work on fixing and repairing and maintaining airplanes, there's a bit iffy whether or not I'm going to be able to show up on the backup stream we had set on Wednesday. And then we figured, why not just get it done today? I don't want you all to go without an episode of the Longhouse for an entire week. I'm afraid you'll get withdrawals. With me, of course, I have Luddic Path, as usual.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be interesting doing it today. When you messaged me about this, I was just lying on my bed with a headache, and I was thinking that I was just going to do like a pre-prep or something, but we were going to do a pre-recorded stream. That was the first idea, and then release it on Wednesday. But I mean, I just had like the voice of Bronze Age pervert in my head, saying stuff like, reject feminine schedule. You need to embrace the masculine dynamism.
Exactly.
And piratic spirit. I was like, okay, we'll just get up and fuck it. We'll just do this whole thing impromptu.
Adopt the thoughts of cultural barbarism. So
yes,
this is part of it. You might not always be able to know when we're going to show up. So we're just keeping you all on
is
your
feminine,
toes.
so from now on, it's just random. Whenever we feel like it, we're going to do these 3-hour streams.
Of course, I have built my schedule around other dissident right types and shows so that I'm not stepping on anyone's toes, which is usually why we have the Thursday
absolutely
evening
feminine
slot. But that's
completely
that's
feminized
feminine.
strategies.
Yeah. So we're gonna see how long we're gonna go tonight, but at least this is one of those episodes where you, Luddic, have dove deep into a topic and you want to share it with the community, basically.
Yes, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I mean it's a lot of information. So this is something we'll have to break into maybe like two or perhaps 3 streams on this
probably.
topic. And because of the time problem, this is going to be a little bit shorter, but I think it's still going to be quite interesting. We'll have to look into some of the more, let's say, the more academic ideas behind the whole concept of the open society. And I mean, this is what I like to call like the factory setting of the Western middle class man and woman, basically. When they talk about, there's been a lot about Pride Month in the newspapers lately, and they talk about this stuff, they're bringing ideology into the schools, and pride is ideological. I mean, the counter is, of course, well, what do you think? Like the default stuff that they were learning before, was that not ideological? But
right,
they really do come with this attitude that the kind of idea of the open society, like the liberal democracy, is sort of the default setting for societies. Mm-hmm. That's like the rational, sensible default setting, and anything else is just craziness.
And I'll admit too, years ago, having uttered the word that pride is just a new religion, And of course, today that is very clear, but it also, comes with the baggage from these same people that they somehow want to keep religion out of politics, which I think a lot of us, or at least ideologies or religion-like aspects or philosophies, and keeping that out of politics to a lot of dissident right people should ring some bells, I think.
Oh yeah, it's a very persistent topic where we're arguing against this idea that there's like neutral institutions, neutral states, that this is not possible, basically. But I mean, we should, I think it's wise to take a look at what is sort of the counter argument or the origins of these sort of ideas that form this kind of let's say people like what's his name, Stubb. What's his name? The first name he had, Alexander Stubb, or
Yes.
these the Blairites and all these people who basically have a lot of political power in the transatlantic countries. Like, what exactly is going on under the hood of these people? What is like their template of thinking, and like the academic foundations behind them, and what can we learn from that as dissidents? I think that was supposed to be like the most interesting part of this. I originally titled the presentation "Lessons from Soros," but I changed it to really just to the open society and its enemies. I think it's
I think having looked through the slides you've made, I think it's an apt way of doing it, because it's a much bigger topic than just one man or one ideologue. It's an entire structure and an entire ideology of its own.
Yes. So I think we should jump right into it, but we have some.
First of all, we have some news and some funnies to catch up on. I say that, but our first topic is articles simultaneously being released a couple of times this week about how pride is appropriate for children in Norway, and one of them talking about how it's not up to the parents what the schools teach our children, it's up to the state, or something like that. some very dystopian titles to some of these articles. I'll start with the pride is for children one real quick. I'm just gonna have to set up my browser here 1 second.
So meanwhile, it's very easy to think that this is just culture war imports, but I mean, if you go back and look at the stream that we did on LGBTQ ideology in Norway, this is very much well, it's not an emergent phenomenon, but it's something that is sort of coordinated across the transatlantic countries and certain Asian countries as well. It's not something that's just it's only happening in the United States, and we're just copying. It's sort of distributed networks that are cooperating across basically national.
And we did our own sort of LGBTQ in Norway stream where we talked about how some of these organizations connect to larger international organizations as well. So I mean, anyone who's been following us in these streams should be able to trace the non-emergent phenomenon line between these things. Do we want to read any of this, or do we just want to talk about it?
If you look at the headline there, there's this little subtitle.
Sure. No child is born with prejudices against queers. That is what is taught by others. Kjell Ingolf Ropstad and other pride critics should be concerned that children learn prejudice, not that they are exposed to diversity.
Which, of course, these people talk about science. I don't have the studies right now, but there are like a lot of these studies where they've basically made people like they've tested people's bodily reactions to watching men kissing, for instance.
Yeah.
And like the natural reaction that people are going to have is like they have the same reaction as looking at a bucket full of maggots or some like really disgusting stuff. Like it's apparently almost across cultures there seems to be a universal approach, especially with two men, like approaching sodomy. It's a little bit different with two women, but two men especially, it's like seems to be an almost sort of universally disgusting trait, almost regardless of what kind of training you gain. I mean, if social, if this kind of blank slate is so powerful that you can basically train people to be disgusted by it, then I mean, okay, maybe I'm wrong, but
Yes.
it's a very interesting idea that people are like trained to be prejudiced and are just naturally tolerant of like say like that stuff, like to like sodomy, you know, everything that's encompassed in that. That's something that people just naturally think is okay, and you have to teach them that this is wrong. I mean, my opinion is just the complete opposite. I think like the natural state of things is that people find that disgusting, and you have to train them basically to accept it.
Regardless of the sort of state of nature on this, I think we can all agree that the space and place and agenda it has in society today is far beyond anything anything that is positive for society. If I'm to put it politely and politically correct, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's also this paragraph where the author writes, yes, parts of the Pride parade are also sexualized, but that does not mean that children should be automatically shielded from it. We believe it is healthy for children to have other impressions than the strictly heteronormative. Sorry, that is a teacher in a school in Oslo.
Oh yeah. The interesting thing, I mean, they write these articles and it's like they're not even trying. They're not making arguments. These people are clearly not trained to try to make any argument. It's really just they get published, and they
well,
read
this is the desk of the Dagbladet, one of the large large newspapers. So this is like the editorial board basically publishing their opinion on something.
And they never appeal to any kind of argument as to like why, you know, if you are a utilitarian, how do you make the utilitarian calculation that this is good for society? They don't make that appeal. They just make this appeal to this kind of inevitable march of progress, and that's the only thing they ever need to do, because they never face any actual criticism for this stuff. They never have to answer difficult questions. They just unpublish or cancel anybody who has a different opinion.
Yeah. And here is a comment by one of the writers for the same newspapers, or a columnist, I suppose, with the headline, "No, parents do not know best. The school does not belong to the parents. It belongs to us all." Which is, you know, this is very much something we have imported from the US, both in terms of importing pride and now also importing sort of the same battle that the US is having about teaching children LGBT material in schools, and parents waking up to this not being optimal.
So with the media coverage, you only get the one side of it, and it like they seem a lot more nervous this year. That's at least what I'm picking up on.
Yes.
Previous years, they've had, like, the articles are usually the same. It's that they're sort of defending themselves against some type of enemy that is not published in the paper. They're always responding to some type of criticism out there. But this year, it seems like the criticism is a lot more harsh. But I don't really get any inputs in the Norwegian media about these parents who are angry with the school boards or anything like that. I mean, have you picked up on anything like this in your local community or
yes,
local
I
newspapers?
have actually, because I live in the Bible Belt, so of Norway. So there's been instances of politicians or people who are aligned with the more hardcore Christian groups who have pulled their kids out of school due to LGBT curriculum. There's been quite a bit of excitement around that, I suppose, in the news. But then, you know, it's the news cycle and it dies down, and I'm not sure what the status is on that right now. But it's been larger this year, and it's been written more about in larger publications. It's not just locally anymore. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, I've noticed it too. So I think, yeah, of course, their thinking is just in such a way that, you know, well, if people are against pride, then we need to keep having pride, and if people are not against pride, then we can't just keep having it because everybody likes it. They're not going to give this up voluntarily.
Now, obviously, the woman who's writing this outs herself as being childless, but also feels that she has a right to other people's children. So Nothing new,
Yes.
but it's nice that she's admitting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if people think about that. It's like if the regular Norwegian person reading this goop, if they think, why are you having opinion on children? Basically, if you don't have kids yourself and you're growing old, why do
Yeah.
like our kids have to be, socially engineered? They have to be nudged into kind of supporting your preferred lifestyle.
Well,
And
I
I
mean,
mean,
it's sort of the neoliberal social democracy coming in contact with the elite theory of LGBT and pride and everything that comes along with the activist part of the society we live in today, right? So you get people who are like, well, why does it matter if I'm just gonna go stay over here. I'm not gonna bother anyone just because they're not hetero, right? But that's not what it's about anymore, right? Because you're not talking to a libertarian here.
nope. Nah. I mean, with these things as well, I don't know. I had a train of thought there about this woman who says in the article that if parents were able to choose, we would still be in the 1950s. And it's kind of saying the quiet part out loud there, which means that
Oh yeah,
parents
I
haven't
found
been able
it.
to choose.
It's up here. If that were true, the world would not move forward, or maybe it had stopped somewhere in the 1950s, probably long before. Homosexuality would have been banned, girls would have been denied education, children would have been flown in by the stork, which is I don't know I guess the English have that as well, like the myth of the stork bringing the kids. If parents still had to decide, we would be less free. We already knew that as children. So yeah, it's those dang parents limiting my freedoms, my ability to put whatever I want into my ass.
I would have
Uh,
gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those dang parents,
yeah,
basically. Like you still think like this, being like an old person who still thinks like we can't let parents make decisions because I want to stop stuff of my who I mean, it's interesting, but these people exist and they're organized.
yes, and they're a lot
They-
more organized than us, as
yes.
we'll get into in a couple of articles. So then we have last week in Fed posting, as you called it. I posted a bit of a preview for this in my community tab. Because with all this pride stuff, we need to crack down on people who are against it as well. So the Extremism Commission has been put in place. And this person, the head researcher, or a researcher on extremism, will lead this commission. And I'm just going to read this. With the memorial for July 22nd outside Høyblokka in the government quarter as background, our Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre for the Labour Party presented the new commission on Friday. He said, to be able to prevent radicalization and extremism, we need more knowledge. We need to see the knowledge and experience that we already have in context. Just keep going. We have not managed to stop the hatred. The life-threatening extremism and racism is still alive. And we'll look at how they will work. So, this woman has been researching extremism for many years. She is affiliated with the Center for Extremism Research at the University of Oslo. She brings in 15 commission members, and then they just list off a bunch of names. The commission's mandate is a broad approach to the field of extremism. The aim is to extract knowledge that will help prepare the country's ability to prevent radicalization and the emergence of extremism. And here are some points about what they want to do. The commission will look at various ideologies, including right-wing and left-wing radicalization. So you tankies, if some of you have managed to land here, you're not safe either. Islamist radicalization and anti-state currents. So libertarians aren't going to be able to dodge the bullet here either.
Yeah, they're coming for all of us.
Yeah.
They got it mapped out, the entire spectrum of like non Overton window approved ideology.
I wonder if there's like a cool like secret agent file on the Longhouse and etc. We'll see. We can
We
only
welcome
hope.
all feds. Unlike the queers, we are here to educate you. It's actually
Yes.
our job to educate you. So please enjoy. We have several hours of material, and we're
Yeah,
looking
we
to
have an
get
incel
monetized.
stream if you want to have a look into that. There's a lot of
If we can
content for
get
you
maybe
guys.
250 Fed subscribers, we can get monetized and hopefully make a living doing this.
Yeah,
So you can just use this show as a bellwether for where the Norwegian right wing is going to move
that would be nice.
in the future. Yeah.
They want to look at attitudes and actions that are apt to undermine democracy. They want to describe development trends nationally and internationally. They want to look at what characterizes a radicalization process. And they want to look at people who do not themselves have the ability or willingness to commit violent acts, but who plays a role in the radicalization of others.
Uh-oh.
Which was the meme I posted with...
Maybe
with
we should have
this.
translated it, but it
Yes.
was a bit makeshift.
Yeah, this is the Google Translate stuff, but this is basically they want to look into thinkers and shows and podcasts and dangerous individuals who might not be violent or willing to commit acts of violence themselves, but may inspire others too. And just so that I don't get into any trouble, if any of you listen to this, you should be smart enough to realize that if you go out and like do a thing, if you go out and Fed post in public right now, you're a retard. And we've talked about this before about how July 22nd and Breivik's actions on that day has done a lot more to harm the right than any left-wing person could ever have done. So this isn't going to lead, that kind of action isn't going to lead to anything productive. And it's, killing other people just because you want to be edgy is just going to make things a lot worse. You have to be smarter than that.
Yes, it's just making things difficult in the future. It's just basically narcissism.
Yes.
At this point, and especially if you're doing that stuff, do not leave any retarded manifestos. I mean, it just makes things difficult. I remember reading like Breivik's manifesto, and at the time, I was just really happy that he was not into heavy metal, because that would have
destroyed heavy metal.
It would have come under fire if that had happened. But no, he was just like, "Oh, I don't like heavy metal. I like electronic music and classicals." I was like, "Whoo," wiping the sweat off, because I was just worried that this is going to be like the last nail, in the metal coffin, if he comes out and says that he loves, I love black metal or something.
Yes. And they will also review serious and specific cases of extremism that will provide a basis for recommendations in how future cases can be prevented. That's a weird translation. The word for that. Well, it's basically preventative work, basically. So, I mean, it's nothing that interesting, but it's, things are happening. They're shining their spotlight on these things. And I think with the increased noise of things like pride and inflation, etc., the requirement to crack down is also going to increase, which is why these kinds of commissions and state organs are needed.
Yes, I mean, from their perspective, I can sort of see that they're afraid of more of this stuff happening, but this is sort of a difficult thing. This is with like these extremist attacks, it's often like traffic accidents. I find myself wondering why it doesn't happen more often, actually, than it does, looking at the way the world is. And that's not an endorsement or anything. Just like I look at traffic and I wonder why people don't crash more than they do.
Right.
When you look at how they drive, and like say with American school shootings, like with the amount of guns in circulation, I wonder why like there are more shootings than there are. I'm kind of surprised.
Well, I mean, there are more than gets put on the news. I'll say that much. But yeah, maybe like considering how many people there are in the U.S., you would expect
very big country with a lot of guns.
You would expect more of them.
So the mental health angle is also a certain thing to that. I mean, if they really wanted to improve this stuff, if they had some better ability. But of course, this is like a super difficult issue as well. What do you do with that? Like with the attack in Kongsberg, with the guy with the bow and arrow, and
who had no like apparent, at least political or ideological affiliation.
No, that was just pure
straight up madman. Yeah,
it's pure schizoism, right? I mean, I don't try to downplay it either. Like, oh, this has nothing to do. I'm trying to play some political game to distance myself from someone like that. But looking at the court documents, and there was no consistent ideology there. He just seemed completely out of his mind. And I mean, he was on welfare as a sort of guy
he was like an hardcore Islamo guy as well, wasn't he? He made like a video about how he was gonna retake the caliphate or something like that. I can't quite remember.
He talked about, in court that he thought he was going to be blinded, and that if he could kill people for Allah, then that would prevent his blindness, and he would be blessed by like the bearded based men or something. I mean, it's just like pure schizo rambly stuff. But of course, the cops have been under fire as well. I'm sorry, that was not a pun. But they got a lot of flack for not being able to stop this guy when you have armed police with handguns.
Yeah, they let him run around for quite some time.
A bow and arrow, and is still able to kill people. I mean, I wonder, like, if you had some security personnel from 500 years ago, how quickly they would have dispatched of this situation. Like, you have some guy with a shield and a halberd.
Did you need to go that far back? I mean, if you just went 100 years back, I think, I think any sheriff would have taken action quite quickly, or night watch for that sake.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I know they're supposed to bring in people alive, but and of course nobody is expecting the bow and arrow, so I assume there was some shock element to it.
No one expects the bow and arrow.
I mean, it's just, you have like arrows flying across.
If the police have been playing any video games in the past years, I feel like every big video game has like bows and arrows in it these days.
Skyrim jokes, or
Skyrim and like all of the new Tomb Raiders, and like every game is like a woman with a bow and arrow these days.
Yeah, they were expecting a girl.
Oh yeah, that's what
threw girl extremist GF.
That's why they sent women police to apprehend him. Yeah. All right. Let's keep going to some recent developments. And we talked, was it just last week, about how Luros seemed a defeated man, and we were more correct than we dared to believe.
One should trust one's guts, and I mean, our guts were completely correct. It was actually worse than what was expected. I mean, the entire show has just unfolded with, I mean, now basically Luros has been fired by the board. He's not just on sick leave anymore. And there's been like so many things that have come out. Supposedly he's going to write another book that's going to be called, the first book was called The Road to Reset, and the next book is going to be The Road Out of Reset. I mean, I hope he can make some money off it. If it does, we're going to do a stream on trying to summarize how things looks from his.
Yeah, there's a large investigative sort of news article written about like sort of the timeline of everything here in Reset, but a lot of this points to, I mean, if I'm going to summarize it, it seems that Luros sort of taking on whoever wanted to do whatever and allying himself with Shurika made him enough enemies that he basically got taken down from within.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain thing with right-wing people where I feel like they, you have to actually trust your gut. You have to actually, like, if you have right-wing beliefs, you have to actually understand how that's applied in your real life. And if you're some guy like Luros and you're out in Kosovo and you talk about, we can't have this liberal society if we have like multiculturalism, because all these different cultures, they'll just go and attack each other, and it's just going to be like, they're fighting for space, and they're fighting for whose freedom's going to trump what freedom. And, so therefore we need to keep like a cultural homogenized country to maintain liberalism. That's like his big thing. So then you go and marry a woman, like you go and start dating a woman from a foreign tribe, and you put her in a leadership position inside of inside of like a Norwegian
Yeah.
newspaper. It's just like it's not going in. It's just like these ideas. Just because she comes out and says like, I'm like the based, based liberal Western
Based
queen or
counter
whatever,
jihad,
but,
yeah.
counter-based counter jihad. Like she is still from that foreign culture. She still has all of those kind of inborn values. Unless you believe like you're just like this complete culture reductionist and you believe you can just convert people out of it. But that's sort of my view on it. Like if he is basically like divorces his wife and then goes into a relationship with someone who's sort of a foreign element, and like makes the rookie mistake of putting her into a leadership position inside of his own organization. It's I mean, you talk about sabotage and this kind of like working against the system, but this is self-sabotage. A lot of this stuff is just pure. I mean, we've covered it already, but it's just pure, pure idiocy. I mean, the other funny things, there's a couple of things that were put out there. That's the reason that I made that video on my channel with the reset slander. It came out the same day that this investigative article came out, because I had to just put something out at the time. I mean, some of the funnier tidbits was, like the woman who's like the base tranny, the lead editor currently. She, like one of the investors were apparently trying to date her before he knew that she was trans.
Which is, there was a point made about that, like where they said, like, he tried to date me before he knew about my, my situation, and the reporter was like, "What do you mean?" "Well, that I'm, that I transitioned." And I was like, "How did he not know?" I mean, look at you. Or maybe I just have Mrs. Walwise commented on this a couple of days ago, because we were driving past something and I said, I don't think, look at that person, I don't think they're like, you're people watching, right? And I was like, I think that's like, is that a man or a woman? And she was like, your tranny radar is really good, or something. She said like had some kind of comment about how my animal brain can just sort of snap to "you will never be a woman" mode when I see people on the street.
I don't know if it's a good like natural instinct. I'm wondering if it's like the terminally online.
Maybe that is true.
Where you're just constantly like like
I'm not looking for it. I just look at someone's face and I'm like, well, I just know, right?
How can you tell? How can you tell?
It's the features. I mean, you can see, like, if you look at a person's body, you can obviously see if they're a man or a woman, as long as they're not like dressed in baggy clothes, right?
But that's I mean, I use the term high effort tranny and low effort tranny.
Well, fair enough. I'm sure if someone like really went out of their way, I'd have some problem struggling, but I'd never end up dating them without having learned. I mean,
of course, you notice that stuff really quickly, but you have like the low effort kind of train wreck trannies, like Rachel Levine, for instance. Or
that's what it's called. Julius Flavius called it gaydar. That's what the Americans call it.
Tradar, sort of tradar. I mean, you have these absolutely ridiculous people, like say, like Rachel Levine or like Jennifer Pritzker. If you could find a picture of
Jennifer,
them,
how do you even write that?
Them, I can't. I'd lose in a spelling bee here. But
I was able to find them. Yeah,
Google knows ahead of time. And I mean, like, this is sort of one of these late transitioning billionaire people who was in the military, and you could just look at the size of the fucking hands on this quote unquote woman. Like this, it looks like she's wearing Hulk hands, like the sort of mask. This is
look at this. Yeah.
See if you can share the photo. Like the fucking
I'm trying
to
show the photo
hands here. On this is like, you have to hide it. It's like the look at them.
What are
look
those?
Look at this. What are those? Holy shit. I mean, this has always been something that amazes me. I guess it's like, genitalia that with hands, that most guys just have like regular hands, but occasionally you run into these people with like these clubs, with these sort of crushing peanuts in your in your palm type hands. It's kind of like
some good physique going on there. I'll give him that.
It's going to be world champion female, arm wrestler.
I didn't want to go into this, but maybe we should just jump on it right away.
Yeah, we can. Let's see.
So the walrus saga in the southern parts of Norway continue. And it's been terrorizing the neighboring piers and boats by taking over ever more private vehicles. What did you commented this as?
This is going to be the new Harambe, basically, because they might have to.
When they have to kill the walrus, no.
They say, "Oh no, we're going to have to go up there and protest."
Its surroundings.
No, this is our cultural heritage now. So I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to bring in like a helicopter or some ship to just carry this out.
They wanted to try to move it, and if that's not possible, they will have to unalive it.
I mean, don't they have like tranquilizers or something? Is it that hard?
Well, yeah, but if it returns, like if they move it and it returns, so
that now it's kind of sad, actually.
Yeah.
He just wanted a boat.
He just wants. She just wants the boat to hang out on. See, people just interacting with it, having a good time. All right. Did we have one final thing? No, I think that was it.
Yep. So that's the news show, but you can get into the presentation and take a look at the actual meat here. So that's what I called it, the Open Society and Its Enemies, which is, of course, the title of the book by Karl Popper. That's sort of two volumes, written, one, I guess, in 1945. Another one that came out a little bit later. But there's a sort of connection there between, I guess, the Karl Popper and his critical rationalism and the ideas applied by George Soros, both in his sort of financial dealings and also establishing one of these, like the Open Society Foundation, that's like this gigantic NGO, world spanning, just keep rolling the slides and I'll just introduce the topics one by one.
Yeah, we'll go from there.
Yep.
Sorry, it's so hot in here. I probably have to do something. All right.
So this is the thing that's sort of popular, I guess, in these circles, to sit and talk about elites and where do elites come from and how do they get there. I mean, there's certain I put on the bullet points here in terms of like, okay, where how do you supposedly understand a lot of these people? Like you have the photo on the right there. I think that's from Hungary, where George Soros was born, where he's now like refused entry from Viktor Orban, where they do really try to sell him as like this crypt keeper type character. I mean, it's quite common, even when you search pictures of him. I mean, one part is like his physiognomy, but he's just so damn old as well.
We joked about so like long. the adrenochrome elite or royal or whatever, and I suppose he's sort of the face of that joke.
Extremely persistent. I mean, these elites don't make a lot of mistakes. They just stick around. They know how to keep themselves alive somehow.
Yes.
But I mean, let's look at the discussion points here. You have like the pre-selection versus merit, where like you have I think a lot of people have the idea that you have maybe some like cabal or some more mafia-like structure, like say like the Rothschild family or some like these old money financial families, or the Illuminati that are able to kind of hand select puppets. I know a lot of people think about Bill Gates this way, where he was just picked out because this is like going to be a faithful ambassador guy. This is like a sort of gullible, useful idiot puppet character. Contra the view that they actually have been able to get where they are through merit. But of course, I think you need a little bit of both. I mean, if you're kind of completely rejected by the existing structure, then it's difficult, no matter how much merit you have. But in the case of like this guy, I think someone like him, like Gates and so on, they're quite high agency people, or like quite meritocratic, actually, more than I think a lot of people would like to admit, because it's just easy to sort of, like, you just look at the guy, or you just see the face, and it's just like this sort of oof reaction, not wanting to really analyze anything. or think
Yeah.
about how they got there. But I mean, my studies looking at these people is, I'm sort of surprised at how much, like how capable these people have been, and how many steps ahead of everybody else they've been in trying to get where they are.
I personally like the is it Dan Carlin line? It's a big club and you ain't in it. Because it's not that you can't work your way into it, sort of like American. I'm blanking on the name. What's the
George Carlin? Is that him?
Yes, George Carlin. But the movie, is it Eyes Wide Shut? I'm thinking of.
Was that the Kubrick movie with the masks and the orgies?
Yes, you can work yourself into the elite circles, but until you sort of adopt their ideology, you'll never be a true believer or a true member, right?
Yes, but there is, of course, the circulation through technology or businesses where, I mean, if you're able to come up with some new concept that becomes very popular very quickly, then you can capture a lot of power.
Yes.
Considering that the old elite might become outdated. Like if you have,
that plays into the whole, I've been diving into through the populist illusion. I've been looking more into the Italians, and that sort of tracks with all of that, and that, the only thing that can unseat a group of elites is another group of elites that gain an advantage somehow.
Yes. And like with Soros' advantage, he was one of the first people to like be in finance, in this type of hedge fund industry, to really kind of implement more of this sort of chaos theory type framework in terms of how he thinks about global trading. And like if you try to do some analysis on the currency markets, for instance, that's what one of the things he's most known for is like betting on currencies. Like let's say like the Deutsche Mark is going to go up, the US dollar is going to go down, or you think the yen is going to be strong against against the whatever, francs or. So I mean, it's a bit of a zero-sum game, and it requires a very astute understanding of like how geopolitical things affect currency, how like different financial institutions work. And like that is sort of like his big thing, is the reflexivity framework that he developed to try to analyze like these world events and analyze financial events. And it's very contrarian contra what is considered established economic theory that you learn in the universities. In fact, he didn't actually study economics. He basically just studied philosophy, started working as a trader, made his own framework, in terms of analyzing stocks, bonds, currencies, and so on. And then he read, the economics textbooks and basically said that it's complete trash. So it's it's very interesting to see a lot of these people who are at the top of the, who are like top level
sort of
financial
the
person.
Warren Buffett approach to trading, I suppose. Then
I guess that would be the opposite. Warren Buffett is like the slow and steady type.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like his inversion or something.
Yeah, it's very much the inversion. Like this is the equivalent of like doing Russian roulettes every day to try to make money, like on these extremely high level gambles based on a lot of some intuition and some methodology. So just going through the points here, like you have the ideology or contra will to power, which is a sort of angle there where you wonder like if these people are just, what does Jordan Peterson say, ideologically possessed or something, like they've read Marx and now they're just, okay, I'm just on my way to the top of
who are the quote unquote true believers,
or whether they're just complete pragmatists and they'll just take any ideological position that they want. And with this one as well, I'm really like listening to some of the lectures and that he's done and reading his essays. It's very hard to pin him down on where he falls, because he has a strong will to power, but he's also very kind of locked down into this open society or this Karl Popper, almost like critical rationalism, enlightenment type thinking in terms of how he wants to move forward. So he's never kind of deviated too much from that. He's always been like this believer in the you have to maintain the liberal democracy at all costs school, basically, and avoid all of these kind of dangerous totalitarian ideas. The next point there, like you have the either the ontological evil or the relativist, where they Like basically, like these, you think about these people are just kind of born evil, basically just there to do stuff, or it's kind of like they just don't care.
Yeah.
Either way, it's like whoever's the stronger guy deserves to be on top. I mean, it's the same thing with this stuff, because a lot of these people in the elites, in my opinion, I think they think they're doing the right thing. Like they think, in their heads on some level that this is good, and I don't think they can even entertain. A lot of them can't even entertain the idea that they're not doing a good thing, and that might as well just be a strength for them. If you're not able to kind of imagine that you're doing something wrong, you're not going to stop.
It's hard to pin down, but I think at some point you're going to have to believe the bullshit you're selling to sell it effectively anyway.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. It's very hard to wake up every day and like put in a lot of work if you don't actually believe in what you're doing. So let's see with the bullet points under here. I mean, we've covered a bit of it with the other points, but so I mean, I think he was a guy that created a lot of opportunities through introducing new ideas and new technologies. Let's see here, my screen.
You mean like an example?
Just a minute here. I need to check. Yeah, the idea is that Bill Gates would have been a guy who came in with like all this new operating system technology and was able to create an opportunity through that. I mean, with Soros, it's really like his financial system. He is, if nothing's happened, I think he's like the highest performing hedge fund manager in the history of the world, basically, and it's quite saying something. That means you have some ideas that other people don't. But we'll get into that in the other slides. If you can keep flipping, and I'll keep explaining. Let's see, but like, okay, why is Soros interesting? I've talked, briefly about a lot of other billionaires or millionaires, like say guys you have in Norway, like Stein Erik Hagen, Kjell Inge Røkke, like who's like the fish.
Vitalen, we've mentioned
fish
a couple
guys,
times.
Vitalen, and yeah. I mean, I've looked at these people, and they're just pure narcissists. They have no other interest in making money and building a bigger house for themselves, creating statues, photos.
They're the Gordon Gekko archetypes. Usually.
I mean, even he was reading like Art of War and doing like speeches, motivational speeches about you could have this, and I mean, he had some monologues in that in Wall Street that were actually kind of cool about his ideas about the market and this kind of market fundamentalist idea that it's kill or be killed. But even that stuff, I think, is like too much for some of these millionaires. They're just interested in making a lot of money, having a cool lifestyle. They're not interested in politics any more than it affects their bottom line.
I think maybe for some of them, when you look at sort of some of the investments and a lot of them, who don't become like stupid rich, end up doing gambles that land them in hard times quite often. It speaks to sort of more like a lifestyle of like living fast and rolling big on the numbers and the risk of that. That might be,
really need to be
psychological.
A risk taker, I think,
psychologizing a bit, but it seems like that's an archetype of person.
Like the John McAfee archetype,
right?
Like this really adventure-seeking guy. And if you have like high intelligence and ambition, along with that, you're going to take some risks. And if you roll a 6, then you could end up you wake up and you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
But Soros is very different from these people, whereas he is sort of guy who comes from like this more middle-class Jewish family in Hungary. I think his father was a lawyer. If I'm not wrong, his father was basically, he volunteered to fight in the kind of Russian Civil War. He was then imprisoned in Siberia for 3 years. He got back out of Siberia, and after that happens, because they live in Hungary, they become occupied by the Nazis, basically, and that becomes like a kind of formative experience for like the young George Soros, where they have to, get new names, they have to assume identities, and even take part in like reporting other Jewish families to to basically be ovened or to be sent to a certain place, right? So and then after that, like, okay, the World War II ends, and then they become occupied by the commies. So it's a bit of like a double deuce, where you've had kind of both experiences of going through two occupations and seeing what I mean. He talks about the exception to the rule. It's like you have to understand that, you know, you live in this kind of regular, stable world, but there's always like these exceptional situations where the rules don't apply to you, and you have to just kind of improvise. And like, he found, like, through that he was you know, more of a thrill seeker in terms of personality, that he found it sort of exciting to try to hide away from hide from these kind of occupying forces, and
hiding in the floorboard, so to speak.
Yeah, this sort of stuff. So he had a kind of predisposition for, as we talked about, the kind of billionaire excitement-seeking person. But what makes him different is that he was more interested in philosophy and wanted to kind of be an academic or a philosopher and try to crack more of these social science problems. And because of that background, he has a much more sophisticated understanding and view on social issues than you would see, I think, of almost anybody. Really, I can't really think of any people who's like super rich who really has like a much more kind of interesting view on how things work than this guy. Like, maybe you can come up with somebody. I can't.
Yeah, but he's the type who sees the money as a means to an end and not the goal in and of itself.
And that's what I wrote there. Like, he donated in total like $32 billion to the Open Society Foundation that he created himself, just to be used to fulfill his political ideals. So he kept basically $8 billion for himself, but this is like basically donating away the majority. It's very unusual for people, you know, who get this rich. A lot of them just sit and hog money, even though they have so much, and they'll just try to sit on it or use it for like a lot of these stupid vanity projects that go nowhere. But you know, everything from his financial career to his what you'd say his career as a kind of influencer, you know, like pre social media, has been like, it's been a success. It's been a sort of unprecedented level of success, even though, like, you know, it's easy to hate this guy. I think it's worth looking at. Okay, how, first of all, that's going to be this lecture. How does he think, and what ideas got him to that point? And the other thing, later, I think we'll be looking at the Open Society playbook to try to see what actually has been going on inside of the Open Society, and, you know, where was the money sent and what projects were undertaken. And so on. So I think if you go to the next slide, we'll take. I did drop some of the backstory there. So see if I can
life stuff.
Some point there. No, we have like after the communist occupation, he left Hungary to go live in London, and then just working like serving tables and attending the London School of Economics. So it's quite a sort of prestigious school to attend.
Yes.
Then he basically was working, or I guess sort of, he had Karl Popper as a, what's the English word? It's not tutor, but it's the
a mentor.
The mentor. That's sort of more the guy who monitors your thesis and so forth. And like through Popper, he was reading the book The Open Society and Its Enemies at quite a young age, and that sort of became his inspiration later. There's a certain perfect coincidence about the book that Karl Popper wrote and George Soros's life that just kind of like slide into each other, where Karl Popper like talks about the, you know, okay, what's the origins of totalitarian? He uses the word totalitarian, but I would prefer to just use authoritarian, because we've seen that even democratic regimes can be quite totalitarian, like with the last 2 years. So, but what's like the source of these authoritarian regimes, and how do you keep them out of society? And looking at things like, okay, Hegel and Marx, Plato, and like the heritage of fascist ideas, totalitarian collectivist ideas. For someone who has like the ethno-religious background that he has, and is coming out of two occupations from like each side of the political spectrum, this is like enormously attractive, as a sort of prospect or as a kind of blueprint to how
we talked last week about the Thomas 777 lens of viewing our current society as explicitly anti-fascist instead of something like neoliberal, and I think someone like him slots very good into sort of a soldier for anti-fascism.
Yes, it slots perfectly into it. And like he doesn't think of it as anti-fascist, but maybe anti-authoritarian.
Right? Yeah, but I mean that's basically the same same word when you mix it into a soup like that.
It maps on quite well. Yeah. So I mean, after being say like he tried to basically create a lot of new philosophical concepts, but he found that he wasn't successful. So he went into a job as a day trader. Then he moves to the United States to try to make money there on the stock market. But before we get to that point, we should try to look more at. I want us to look closer at the open society and its enemies. See what's the actual content. So I think that's the next slide. Okay, before that comes up, we have to what's the foundational bricks or the what do you call it, the building foundation,
the building blocks of
where this open society idea comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Karl Popper was what do you call him, a science philosopher, where he tries to look at epistemology, how knowledge is gained, and how do you his big project was how do we understand what's good science and what's bad science.
Mm-hmm.
Say for example, when people talk about scientific socialism or is Karl Marx scientific, or these types of
it's certainly
questions.
Something that's born out of the humanities and not the STEM fields where you can prove stuff, but even then you can veer into philosophical interpretations of things. You
could make a lot of egregious mistakes within the STEM fields as well. So this is his arena, more or less, to try to work on how we can create a framework for figuring out what's actually quote unquote real science and what's just conjecture, or so I mean he if you think about the ideas of deductive and inductive logic, is that I don't want to butcher this stuff, but the inductive approach to logic is basically the sort of top-down logic, where you start to look at general observations about say stuff that's going on in the world with you have the picture of the swans there. The black swan that's become this symbol for the unexpected event that's talked about. COVID was the black swan, or
right.
All of these the housing bubble was the black swan. There's these things that you don't expect. But I mean, you'd be forgiven for thinking that black swans don't exist. I've never seen one in real life, and let's say based on inductive logic, I would see I've only seen white swans, so the majority of swans are white, and therefore it's logical to reach the conclusion that all swans are white, or create a theory that all swans are basically white, because I can generalize based on what I've seen. But the sort of philosophical problem that comes in there is that as soon as I see a black swan, that entire idea is just bunk. And the question is how many swans actually exist throughout all of time, and how many swans have I seen? And you realize the sample size that I have is usually quite limited. It's I have very limited information based on a very large picture, and meaning that most of the conclusion you reach in inductive logic ends up just being falsified over time, and it's not a proper way to go about creating proper scientific theories and proper philosophy.
It's not good for science, but I remember from my logic classes thinking it's quite useful for life. If you want to survive, you can use inductive logic. If you want to have a big brain, you have to use a deductive.
I mean, what is an artificial intelligence? I mean, it's just using generalized observation, or you have mathematical modeling that's used in finance and other things where they do use inductive logic. And there's nothing wrong logically with inductive logic, but it is just this phenomenon where it's it can always be falsified by
it's hard to
an observation.
universalize.
So therefore, you can't create laws. Basically, you can't derive solid laws of reality from inductive logic. So you have to go the opposite direction, to use deductive logic, where you sort of start off with a theory and create a testable hypothesis from that, and then you keep testing to try to fail the hypothesis. And as long as the hypothesis does
that's
not,
why it's that's why we call it the science, because science is proving. It's a bit weird because you're proving that something is not false.
yes,
but that's the best you can do, right? Because
and that's
you can't
the
prove
idea.
that something is true.
But that's sort of Karl Popper's contribution, like the idea that you're trying to prove that it's not false. And you're always trying to just falsify something. And if it is falsified, then you try to correct the hypothesis and repeat. So it's a sort of negative feedback loop that is always adjusting to come closer to reality. Testability, falsification.
Any computer programmers in the audience, if I have any left, if you've ever written unit tests, you've done that. You've proven that something is not false. You're proving that the code you're written is not failing. You're not proving that it's working correctly, but it's not failing according to your specifications.
So yeah, I mean, if you have some education in STEM, this idea will have popped up there, and it's I can't find anyone from before Karl Popper that has the exact same kind of formulation on this. I mean, of course, he gets to the idea of natural and social sciences, where in the natural sciences, this is all hunky-dory, just using the deductive approach and finding laws. But the social sciences are, of course, a lot messier. And that's where we get back to the ideas of okay, is social science really science? And I mean, with Popper, the absolute majority of social science that's produced will not pass the sniff test of this critical rationalism.
And in modern day, we have, a bunch of results that have come out of, reproducibility issues and
replication crisis, I believe.
Replication crisis, yes, and sample sizes and just crazy stuff.
But it's not just that, but I mean, those are more sloppy work or failures to kind of adhere to this idea. But with Karl Popper, he's been more on the offense and trying to attack a lot of philosophical ideas or ideas in social science that are before this became everything was going to be falsifiable. There was a lot more, let's say, floating around in the pond that was quite popular among very smart people. Yeah. So if we keep rolling the slides, you can take a look at. Let's see, the book is then released of the Open Society and its enemies. You could click the link there and get a short video of Karl Popper himself talking. Trying to describe what exactly he believes the Open Society is. I mean, that's one of the things about this book, is that it's not a very detailed recipe of how the Open Society is supposed to look, but it's much more of an emphasis on the enemies of the Open Society.
Yeah, what is it not supposed to look like? He's basically proving
the people who are screwing it up or who are not allowed.
He's using his own framework here to basically outline what is not correct.
Yes, that's very good. So I have German speaking with subtitles.
I think I have audio on, so we'll just see.
At least you have the subs there.
Wie Sie sagen, es heißt die offene Gesellschaft und ihre Feinde. Die Feinde sind hauptsächlich die Faschisten, die Nazis und aber auch die kommunistische Diktatur, obzwar die kommunistische Diktatur ja damals mit uns verbündet war. Und was ich bei der offenen Gesellschaft gemeint habe, war eine Gesellschaft, sagen wir, in der man frei atmen kann, frei denken.
You can't do that in America anymore. Sorry. There's no breathing. Even Ukraine can't breathe.
Free air, yeah.
No sneezing.
Kann, in der jeder Mensch einen Wert hat und in der die Gesellschaft keine überflüssigen Zwänge über die Menschen ausübt. Ja, es gibt Gesellschaften, die mehr oder weniger offen sind Und es gibt Gesellschaften vor allem, die gar nicht offen sind. Unsere westlichen Demokratien waren sogar während des Krieges weitgehend offene Gesellschaften. Seit dem Krieg ist es leider mehr und mehr dazugekommen, dass die Politik so kompliziert wurde, und die Parteidisziplin so straff wurde, dass die Parteiführer fast diktatorische Mächte haben, und das ist sehr schlecht. Es ist dafür.
I mean, if I didn't know any better, I'd say this guy's a libertarian. No,
That's the problem with this. That's like, well, I guess if I'm going to level some critiques at this, this could be interpreted as a totally libertarian doctrine. But I mean, when you get a little bit closer to it and you start looking at the ideas that he endorses in the book and the stuff that George Soros has been putting his money into, it's like the exact opposite of libertarianism. It's so there's like this dissonance there that's always there, where you look at this stuff like from like you said, the ideal white man perspective. This is perfect, abstracted type of society where everybody can have a certain amount of freedom.
Yeah, you have your plot of land and you don't bother your neighbors and they don't bother you and everything is hunky-dory, but, I
mean, when you can't agree on what freedom is, I feel like that's the crisis where we're in right now, where we can't really agree on what this open society is supposed to be or what are the freedoms even for. And then it becomes a lot less open. And it's I mean, these people aren't alive anymore. It would have been really interesting to see, let's say, if Popper was still alive, like what he would have thought about the developments that have happened now. Mm-hmm. This is something that I'm always interests me to, you read these more highfalutin academics from the past and you want to know like where you could put them on the current political grid. And if you put them far enough left, I'm just sort of ready to dismiss them. This is a bit of a rant or a little bit of an offshoot, but say someone like Noam Chomsky, for instance, who is still alive. And I mean, he's written a lot of interesting books, a lot of good lectures, very intellectual guy. And I'm listening like back to his old lectures, and it sounds just like this one. It sounds so good. It's like, this private tyrannies, and we need to have the proletariat needs to be liberated with a democratic workplace, and all this sort of like this very highfalutin stuff, and talking, making it sound like he really understands.
Like Richard Wolff lectures as well.
Oh yeah. It sounds absolutely great, but then you get down to the actual issues, like say like with the with the medicine. Let's just say, I don't know if we can say that on YouTube now. And Noam Chomsky just comes right out and says that people should just be forced to take the medicine and they can starve on the streets. Like, right?
Oh, okay.
Where
did the freedom go? Yeah.
I mean, when he's talking about like these the private workplaces that are like corporate tyrannies, they're private tyrannies, and talks about like how bad all these jobs are because they're like private undemocratic tyrannies. Well, what's the problem with that? I mean, if you don't think it's wrong that your workplace is going to force you to inject something into you that you don't want, and they'll throw you out in the street, what exactly is your problem with the workplace? I think like that's bordering on how bad it could possibly get. And if you find
can't have it both ways, right?
What are you complaining about? Well, like I don't understand what the fuck Chomsky's even complaining about. If he thinks that's okay for a private workplace to just like throw you out of your job because you refuse to inject yourself, then I just don't get it. And it throws dirt on everything he's written, basically. So I guess there's an expiration date on academics as well. Just like we talked about with artists, the 27 club, there should be like at least a 75 club or something for the academics.
just sad. You're not allowed to write anything after 60 or something. Yeah.
Just retire.
Yeah.
All right, but now we've heard the man himself. We can go back.
You can only talk in like esoteric interviews and like pub. You can only do like Evola or Bowden type lectures in like small dingy collectives. That's all you're allowed to do. Do you want to watch the rest of this or?
Nah, I think we're fine.
All right.
I just wanted to have him there explaining it because I thought if I would try to explain you know,
Yeah, it's
based
better
on
to
what
get
I've
it
read,
from his
what
own
it is,
words.
and it would sound like I'm just misrepresenting, or it's just too vague. But it is like deliberately vague in the way that he's putting it.
Yeah,
Both in, you know, like his argument for the open society is both like a sort of practical argument of the fact that you can, let's say you have a system that is open to discussion and where you can talk about ideas, and you have a democratic sort of liberal government that allows people to vote, then you can, you know, remove bad leaders, quote unquote, through discussion, and you don't have to have violent revolutions every 10 years to remove people who are faulty. Like they can sort of be a kind of flexible dynamic system there where people can talk their way to good conclusions. And I mean, of course, this sounds completely naive to us. And even with like George Soros, and you hear some of his later lectures that he has just sort of like, he doesn't really, he feels like it was almost a fallacy to believe that this was going to work out.
It's kind of strange because,
you know?
I mean, you brought this up specifically, and I did some research on it because he brings up Plato, right?
Yes.
In this, and I see you have it here a bit later on the points here, but he brings up Plato specifically as someone who didn't understand this when Plato explicitly wanted to sort of lean into it. And that makes it kind of weird that he's like, Plato was wrong, I'm right, but I've learned that maybe he was right after all, right? it's kind of
I don't know what's the, you know, the quote there that all philosophy is just a footnote on Plato. And it's kind of how it feels. I understand that a lot better now, because he kind of said, you know, Plato in a sense said everything that needed to be said on a lot of things. But I'm just going to go through the points here. So there's 2 volumes to this. The first volume is I think it's called The Spell of Plato, where he goes through why he thinks that Plato is like the progenitor, the originator of, you know, basically fascist or authoritarian thought. And like it's very thorough in his analysis of how that of how it is, which is, I mean, it's funny, as a little aside, I mean, I took a philosophy course at one point, and we were like, some of the first homework we were tasked to do was to read Plato's Republic.
Yep.
And, you know, at that time I was, you know, a little bit more studious, a little bit more, you know, enthusiastic about doing homework. So I actually read what we were tasked to read, and I started to ask questions afterwards of like, you know, I wasn't that
Dangerous.
read at the time, but it was sort of like, well, you know, this sounds kind of like fascism or something. And the lecturer was like, yeah, no, this is like, you know, pre-humanitarian, like proto-feminist. What a stupid bitch! Like, holy, like in retrospect, what? How do you get to like master's level, you know, philosophy and not understand that, you know, yeah, this is proto-fascism? Like, I mean, Karl Popper has said this. You know, Bertrand Russell, if you read the history of Western philosophy, he says the exact same thing. They all say that. Like, I mean, you know, I can be a little dismissive of those 2 people because, you know, they have this kind of default condescending attitude towards anything that's not British liberal thinking. Like they're just so condescending towards any metaphysical ideas or
anything continental.
And this is something that we've grown up in. This is something that we live in. This kind of like, you believe in religions or this kind of weird historical metaphysical stuff.
Like you get dunked on for thinking that maybe, you know, maybe there's more to life than
yes, and it comes very much from like that school. I believe, you know, that the elite is kind of Anglo-Jewish elite of these kind of British-style rational thinkers that ended up dominating the space and just
it's
clearing
interesting
out
because,
all of these
you know,
other
you could make the argument that what created the freedom for these to do their thing, guys probably like Hume or others, as you mentioned, like Anglo guys, sort of the situation that allowed them to do their work is sort of what they rebelled against. And it's a bit of a weird like paradox, I guess.
Absolutely. But volume 2 here, I need to stick to the bullet points because the topic is so broad that it's easy to get lost in the weeds here. And then volume 2, he goes through like Hegel and Marx, where you're sort of looking more at the development to the sort of leftist extremes, like the you know, where does communism come from and what's the ideological heritage of that. Let's distinguishing between like the open and the closed societies quickly the open society is basically like the individual first society. You know, the human rights is very much in line with the open society, where it's prioritized that the individual should be entitled to certain things, and the individual doesn't have to sacrifice themselves for the group or for the state or the collective. Whereas the closed society is really if you look at the state first, you know, the health of the state or the health of the society, the health of the tribe before the individual. And then like the individual has to kind of sacrifice themselves. So they have to, you know, they're only as good as their service to the group is, right? So that's where he draws a distinction between what's a closed and open society. And like he looks at, you know, what the justifications for these closed societies, where he's using the term historicism. That is, like, from his perspective, it's basically the idea that you try to create universal laws out of looking at history.
Yep.
Which is something that doesn't pass the smell test of critical rationalism. Like, it's not something that is sort of like testable hypotheses with, you know, measurable sizes and actual values. It's more like, I mean, you know, who's a historicist? I mean, most thinkers, to some degree, that are not within this British rationalist school end up on some level of historicism. He distinguishes between two sort of styles of historicism, where he has like the pessimistic historicism, that's really that of Plato, or say someone like Spengler, for instance.
I was going to bring up Spengler.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's really sort of pessimistic historicism. I think you like the sort of Evolian Hindu view of the world, where you have these cycles where things are just getting worse progressively. That's also very pessimistic. It's like the historical loss of the cycles from the golden to the silver.
Yeah, it's
the
only
bronze
like
age.
400 and something thousand years left, guys. It's we're going to get there. We're all going to make it.
But it is the idea that his history will move in basically in these loops, and it's a pessimistic look because it's getting worse. You know, with Plato, explaining how that works with Plato's ideas is that I don't know like how familiar the watchers are with Plato, but he is I mean, the theory of forms, I guess people are familiar with, like the people in the cave who are just sitting inside the cave looking at the shadows on the wall. That's sort of just reflections of like the true form of what's actually going on. That's the kind of core idea to Platonism, that there is a metaphysical world of like the true forms of things, and that's where things originate. And everything that exists in the world is like some copy. It's some imperfect copy of a perfect form.
Of what it could be, yeah.
Yes. So there's like a perfect cat, for instance, and every cat that exists, it's some kind of like imperfect copy of that cat. Every chair that exists is an imperfect copy of the perfect chair. And every society that exists is an imperfect copy of like a perfect, healthy society. And that's where the pessimism comes in, because the Plato's Republic, like the way he outlines the idea, is that he wants to have basically a society that is as close as it can be to like the perfect metaphysical society. And every change away from that perfection is basically a change for the worse. It's chaos, really kind of chaos or decay, or things getting worse. So there's the pessimism there, is that you can only make a good copy of the perfect society, and every change you make to that society is just going to degrade society further. So that's where the pessimism comes from.
Yep.
I mean,
I touch on this. I just want to shill for a second. I touch on this a bit, and the way that Gwinon looks at this in the video I made on the death of craft, I think I called it, on my channel here, if anyone want to sort of dive into how that pertains to the reign of quantity versus quality, because he leans on the same sort of understanding of the world when he defines those.
Yes. I mean, we talked about it previously on the chat, but this book was very useful for me to read, because it's much clearer now how I want to, when I start talking about the right-wing politics, that right-wing politics is really something that you connect to, like the sort of pessimistic historical laws. It's something that I connect to formalization of hierarchies, which basically means just fortified inequality, from the liberal perspective.
Yep.
And it's something that is tied to like tribal politics. That's really like the friend-enemy the laws that are based on us versus them. that is it's really like after the Second World War with this anti-fascism regime, those ideas are basically outlawed, more or less. I mean, the entire Western framework of human rights is completely counter to this kind of
to any sort of
right-wing worldview, where you actually have hierarchies that are formalized, which means that you don't have human rights. Like every individual is not going to have the same rights. I mean, it's going to be based on the caste system or the hierarchy that you're in, or something like that. That's what determines the rights that you have in society. And I mean, if it's basically
it's not even rights. I mean, it's privileges, right? It's,
it is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But you will be sort of limited or allowed based on where you fit into this hierarchy, and it's completely incompatible with this open society liberal view.
People are arguing in the chat about who this fourth guy, I suppose it's the down to the left, is.
This is Heraclitus.
Ah, okay.
That's I mean, he's described that he was one of like the oldest Greek philosophers. I mean, Popper describes him as like the one of Plato's biggest inspirations, but he's sort of more known for the idea of flux, basically the world of fire, like the entire world, like the element of the world is created from is fire, and so the world is in constant change. You can't step into the same river twice. I mean, there's some psychologizing going on in the book where Popper is always like, this is very typical for these British. I mean, I guess for any philosopher, really, Nietzsche does the same thing. And he talks about, the context for when Plato lived is that, Plato lived in Athens during the Peloponnesian Wars, which was the Athens against Sparta. And Sparta won that war.
Yeah.
So like the psychologizing angle from Popper is basically, and Bertrand Russell as well, is that the idea of Plato's Republic is to create something that's closer to Sparta, that would be like a sort of superior,
something that could withstand Sparta, basically. Yeah,
it could withstand Sparta, basically survive a society with like strict caste systems where the health of the society was like number one importance, basically. I mean, the idea of justice in Plato's universe is basically, what is just is what is good for society as a whole, or what is sort of good for the health and survivability of society. Justice has nothing to do with egalitarianism or like the individual being free or people being treated just on an individual basis. It's like justice, what is good for really the ruling class, actually. I mean, that's something that
in the end, that's what it is, right? So
yeah, that's this is something that Heraclitus touches on as well. Is that what is good for the ruling class. Like I actually get the impression that these were like the first elite theorists, because they're very much about making sure that you have a solid like ruling caste in society, and they need to be
that's what I said when I mentioned that his solution is to sort of lean into these laws of power and try to if this is going to happen, all right, how do we make it as close to utopian as we can.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I come back to the sort of footnote thing. It's like, it seems like, the more I read about Plato, like the more based I realize that he was, like to everything else is just kind of, we try to comment on that. But I've talked to, about the pessimistic historicism, but if you look at the other version of historicism, we get to people like Hegel or Karl Marx, that was very deeply influenced by Hegel. And this is where like progressivism comes in. Like progressivism could be seen as a type of positive historicism, where instead of just declining from a point of perfection where things just get worse, we're going from like a dark place to something that's becoming utopian.
Hegel has the synthesis argument, isn't it?
Yes, it's like the German idealist
that we're
stuff where you're
synthesizing the perfect over time. Yeah.
Where it's like states are basically through conflict going into dialogue, and it's like this constant dialogue process that's ending in more of this kind of utopian or this perfect. I can
understand
state.
it, like just when you said it now, I had like a brainwave that in the physical space, I can sort of understand it because, a continental European is of course gonna, look back on his own history of warring states for like 1,000 years more or less, or even more, and say that this is what we're doing, because he basically lives in a crucible where only the strong survive over time. But uh, applying that to societal, rules and norms seems to have been one hell of an experiment that we're doing right now.
Oh yeah, certainly. But I mean, Popper brings in the psychologizing as well. I mean, that's what you see with both Bertrand Russell and Karl Popper, is that they hate Hegel. Like, they just have absolute contempt for Hegelianism, and they use every opportunity to shit on Hegel. Like, I mean, with Plato, it's like they seem to have a little bit more of a venerance for the stuff that he did, even though they acknowledge that he was authoritarian. But with Hegel, they basically say that he just writes this sort of incomprehensible stuff. He just tries to impress people with words and create like a cult of personality around himself, where he's almost like this magi status, where people just believe everything that he says because he's so good at Scrabble babble. And he also claims
who was an actual wizard.
I mean, he also says that like Hegel's entire project was just to justify Prussianism, to be like this kind of Prussian state philosopher, to create a philosophy of like utopian dialectics. To basically, every German has to kind of sacrifice themselves to the state, to the health of the state. So there is some connection there between Plato and Hegel. It's just that Hegel takes it in a different direction.
Yeah.
But like with Marx, you get a very different view of it, where he takes on board some of the Hegelian dialectic idea of synthesis and dialectic. But instead of having the idealist dialectic, you go into sort of material dialectic, where instead of having like the war between nations, you get the war between classes. Mm-hmm. And instead of idealism, it's materialism. It's basically like sort of superstructures and material conditions that determine society, and society goes through this kind of like these laws of constant class struggle that's going to end up in the communist society at some point.
Yeah, the 5 stages or whatever he outlines.
Yes, and this is something that Popper dunks on this stuff as well, but not in such a malicious way as he would do with a lot of these other guys, because he has a lot of sympathies with this sort of egalitarian, humanitarian project that Marx envisions, but he doesn't believe that you can use historical laws to bring that about. And that he just sort of breaks apart all of these ideas as basically being unscientific and not really passing the sniff test of critical rationalism. So, I mean, I put on a bullet point there, like these terms, utopian social engineering versus piecemeal social engineering, like that sounds like some slandery stuff that I made up, but this is actually word for word what's being used in the book. He says that, the historicists, whether it's Plato or Marx, they want to use social engineering to bring about a certain historical outcome. Like they have like this large vision of where we're going, and that, social institutions and individuals are supposed to be subjected to, they have to be basically, how do you put it? They're subordinated to the larger project of the utopia that's going to be brought about. So the health of the individual or the health of the institution is less important than the kind of utopian end that they aim for. But what he advocates for is like the so-called piecemeal social engineering, is that you try to basically just use falsifiability, and you try to just optimize social institutions constantly for maximum sort of individual empowerment or individual freedom. And like this is where we're getting the contrast between like this kind of Soviet propaganda, like this kind of Nazi propaganda, with this kind of more containment-based system that we're living in now. I mean, I really like this term piecemeal social engineering. It's like, nudge departments making these.
I can understand it. Like, it sounds nice, but it's, it doesn't mesh with reality.
No, I mean, it is, kind of painful to live within that framework as well. But this is where you're getting the nudge department, all of these containment strategies, all of these kind of small things that are constantly being done to alter things in society to kind of optimize for this, open society outcome.
Yeah.
And I think people, like the audience, can probably think of a lot of things that are going on, but like this is the that book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, it just kind of outlines it very clearly that that's how you should do it. You should just be very kind of like step by step.
Sure. I mean, it's the social democrat approach to all of this.
Scientific, scientific numeric criteria that you can actually measure and try to constantly optimize these institutions over time so that you can maintain the open society and keep out, these utopian elements. Let's see. Yeah, I think I covered all of the basis on this one. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah, I think we talked about the others as well. Yeah, but it's nice to have this as a basis going forward because, I mean, assuming this is part 1 of 3, we're going to need it.
Yep. Let's see here. I've touched on some of these ideas here. That's like the interesting ideas. In the next slide, there's a picture of like outlining this horseshoe theory. But no, I just want to make a point about the contradictions and the sovereignty that I picked up. That's one of the things that I picked up on there. But like the horseshoe theory is basically why you always, what is a centrist, right? I mean, a centrist is basically like one of these adherents of the open society, whether they know it or not, right? They're not really interested in taking a stand on anything left, right, politically. They just want to like maintain the individual rights.
Yeah. As long as I get to play my video games,
yes, and as long as I have the
I don't really care.
Right. So
yeah,
I can sort of just maintain that stuff, and that's why they're always kind of.
It's the Adam Sitch.
Yeah, it is Adam Sitch. I'm not even kidding. Like, I mean, they're just like if you smashed Karl Popper in the head like 5 times with a bat or something, then you get like Adam.
Split him into 2. Yeah.
Adam friended. If you've like half the brain of Karl Popper, basically that's but it's like they're not that wrong. It's easy to just laugh at it, but like that is why I call it like the factory setting in Western liberal countries. Mm-hmm. You're just kind of born into thinking that this is the norm.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are unless you're like. I mean, maybe if you're like the silent generation, you might know of something different. But I mean, these days, there's not many people who haven't been.
You have no reference. And unless you've been in one of these quote unquote closed countries, then you don't have any reference for how another system could look. So one of the things that Popper points out is really like the contradiction of theories of sovereignty, where he basically makes the point that, let's say you're a Democrat or something, or you believe in democracy, and you say, well, the people are sovereign. What happens then if the majority of people choose to elect a tyrant that becomes a dictator? Like you sort of have to accept the idea that, well, this is the will of the people, basically, because the people put them in power. And he says like it's the same thing. Like if you say like you're a monarchist and you say, well, the monarchy, the monarch should be sovereign. Well, what if the monarch says that I want basically the priests to control society, so I give away my sovereign rights to the theocracy, for instance? Like all of these things could happen. So you basically, like, regardless of what ideas that you have, you need to have institutions that are like these kingmaker institutions in society that maintain the sovereignty, like regardless of, that sort of puts the checks on whatever it is that you have, whether it's a monarchy or something else. If you want to stop the monarch from giving away his power, for instance, like you need to have the institutions around that. And like this is something that I think like the people on the left understand a lot better than the people on the right, that you need to sort of go through the institutions, the kingmaker institutions, instead of going to the direct battlefield.
Well, yeah, but it's I think it's born of a totally different world. I think that's the underlying problem. As you said, you have to take it through the institutions instead of the battlefield. But the natural place for the right winger is the battlefield in that sense.
Yes.
So it's hard to sort of encapsulate that, or I suppose explain that to. Like if you were going back and explaining that to someone who is like a hardcore right-wing philosopher, it's going to be hard, right? It's good to tell that to like a medieval king, right? or a feudal lord that you need to capture the institutions.
You got to capture the institutions, bro. It's a long march, bro.
It was basically like organized mafia society, and it's just a different world, right? That birthed these ideas.
I mean, I just like so many of these ideas are brought up in this book because, I mean, regardless if you like, these British rationalists or not, they're quite intelligent. They have a lot of interesting takes on things, and it's a sort of pleasant read. A lot of it's because you're very accustomed to this way of thinking if you grew up in a liberal democracy. I sometimes suspect that that's why I think it's hard to read other philosophers that are kind of less modern because they're just in a completely different headspace in terms of how they conceptualize.
Yeah, that's usually why it's rough to get into like pre-1900s philosophy. I feel, and it's like the first chapter of Revolt Against the Modern World is basically Evola trying to explain how everything I'm doing in this book is literally trying to adjust you to the capital T tradition way of thinking. That's sort of his goal, right? Try to massage you from the modern way of thinking back into the old way of thinking, and it's rough.
It's absolutely necessary.
Yeah,
like I've announced support for it before, and I'll do it again. I mean, the idea of just like what do you say, like boomerizing people? It's actually extremely important if we're going to have any success in the long run, because if too much of that boomer baggage is left, then we're just going to end up in the same place.
Yeah.
We are now. But if you go to the next slide, we can look at the like the horseshoes. Funny horseshoe theory here.
Oh yeah, let's get some horseshoe memes going.
I mean, I made more of them, but I didn't want this presentation to be too memey.
Should have included the old. Didn't Academic Agent do like he made a triangle or something like that? This is many years ago. Let me see if I can find this while you talk about it.
I mean, if you paid attention to the last slide, you can sort of see where this thinking comes from, or what the symbolism is here of like what's the actual right wing and the actual left wing, and why they talk about the horseshoe where they meet in the middle from the perspective of this more like rational liberal person. You have two ideologies that are both historicist, quote unquote. That engage in metaphysics. They are authoritarian. They subjugate the individual under the mass, and so on. So you can sort of see where they have the horseshoe. But I mean, the funny thing is that you could mix this horseshoe up in different ways. I mean, you could have the horseshoe where you have the reactionary or kind of the authoritarian, the right winger in the center, and you have like the liberal and the commie next to each other, because they basically have similar goals in terms of equality. The French Revolution stated goals of brotherhood and equality, and so like, I mean, even the commies tend to do this stuff where they will group the liberal in with the fascists as a sort of I mean, to me it seems like a little bit more of a cope. I can kind of see why you would group the liberal with the commies and the commies with the authoritarian right. But the kind of like liberal authoritarian right combo, I mean, it can only be understood through this more like almost this critical theory race type of lens, where you look at liberalism as just a kind of fortified or a formalized type of white supremacy, basically, which in some sense it kind of is. When you think about the roots of the British liberalism, it is just like a formalized white man's way of thinking. And when,
sure.
like with the American Empire, when you're trying to spread that around, you can sort of see like this is basically, you're just like spreading a bourgeois ideology around the world to stop the utopia from coming about. So in a sense, I can see all three, how you could just swap these pictures around and make an argument for why you would group these together.
But I mean, it doesn't really have any value aside from placing yourself as a moral superior.
No, right. I'm the real whatever.
Yeah.
Everybody else is just the same. It's me who's the real something.
Yeah, I'm the real big brain. Yeah.
But I mean,
that's actually why I found, like I mentioned the triangle thing, but it made at least more sense in that each part of the triangle, I didn't find it, but sort of sees the others as enemies. That makes a lot more sense.
Oh yeah, they do.
Yeah.
But like, from the perspective of these people, like this is how they see the world. Like you just have to maintain this kind of very vaguely defined liberalism with some, and that's I guess that's one of their biggest problems, is that the open society itself is so vague that okay, we're just kind of keeping all these other forces at bay for as long as we can, but we don't really have any win condition for it. So we can only sort of falsify it. We don't really have any actual state that we're trying to bring about. We just make sure that the individuals can keep talking to each other, and that's going to somehow, make stuff great. Righto. But if you keep sliding, we can take a look at some of Soros's ideas that are sort of birthed out of this this kind of Karl Popper mindset.
Yes. I just want to, because they're talking about the Norwegian king in the chat, and Glow in the Dark says, what is the most right-wing thing he said? Well, I have him on record saying, being very pro pride stuff in like his last yearly speech that he does. So I don't know how based he actually is. Some people are saying that he is, but I don't know.
Harald, the Norwegian king?
Yes.
I don't think he's based
is a lost cause, but what did you say? Sorry.
I don't think he's very based at all. I would like to see
so
if anybody has some footage or something, some quotes that are funny or where he slips some truth in there. I'd like to see them, but I couldn't. I mean, the royal family has never been that interesting to me. It's I like the idea of monarchy, but like the people who are actually there right now are.
Yeah, it's a shadow of its former glory. I mean, it's the institution without the metaphysics to sort of justify it and make it productive and make it lasting and proper. So it feels kind of like to just blindly follow something that's gonna put you up against a wall and pull the trigger.
I'm not like we've talked about previously. It's easy, for like right wingers I've seen to get lost in their own ideology, and they just get so lost in these kind of logic traps where they just get stuck and sniped by the lefties.
Yeah,
whether it's the traditional like Christians or the kind of ethno-nationalists, or like you said, like with the monarchists, is that if the king is paused, then what do you do, right?
Yeah.
This is like Popper's point as well with sovereignty. I mean, if you want a monarchy, but the king doesn't want to be a king, he just wants to give power to other institutions. What do you do then? Like being a monarch is not just.
But
like,
I mean, you're envisioning a monarchy without a hierarchy, right? I mean, you can't just have one of them. You need everything. You need like the metaphysics, the hierarchy. You need. I mean, if you want monarchy that existed in feudal Europe, you need feudal Europe, right?
Yes.
I mean, you can't just pick and choose. It's not a buffet.
Right. But looking at the slide again here, so we have on the left George Soros' book.
Look, Scholl says, I never realized that Soros used to be younger. That's the way of putting it. I just found that funny.
He started with the Open Society Foundation at 50 years old, right? So he was very old already when he started, and I think now he's like 90 something.
Yeah.
He's from as a sort of player in this kind of political game, he came into it quite late, where he sort of explained that he felt like his job, like he was getting older, and like the job of running these hedge funds was just getting too stressful. I mean, it's easy to just think of these people as just like these pure psychopaths, like Trump or something, where they can just handle infinite amounts of stress. But
taking on the
Soros,
puppet master is a much more leisurely time.
Yeah. I mean, he talked about it just almost having heart attacks at multiple points from sitting and doing all these this money management stuff that he does, because the style that he manages the fund. I mean, for those
Gates is still going, as hard as he is.
I mean, they have quite a bit of stamina, and that's what you see. I mean, with a lot of these people, you're surprised at how many, hours of the day they're sitting and working on this stuff. So this I mean, he's written, I think, about 12 or 13 books. This is one of his most successful ones. Like, it's being taught in business schools. It's being taught in, like, people who work in the sort of financial industry are going to be like vaguely familiar with the concepts of this one. Like, this book is very different from a lot of the finance books that you get that are a little bit, more focused on straight strategies or more concrete cases of how you should invest and what kind of stocks you should invest in. This book is really like more of a philosophy book that is leading into finance, where he tries to, use the one thing that he's known for, that is like the theory of reflexivity. It was something that he worked on as a graduate student, but he eventually ended up giving up because he wasn't able to like theoretically explain it properly. So he just said, I'm just going to give up and try to get a job and make some money that I can live off. But he ended up being successful using these the theoretical framework that he developed as a philosopher in finance. So we have to, basically go back to Popper to understand how this comes about. Like, you need to apply critical rationalism in social science, how social science is different from the natural sciences. And like, the examples that he uses is that he says, like, in natural sciences, you can just get these simple examples, like you heat water and it boils at one point, and you can repeat the experiment. And it doesn't matter, like, if you're looking at water boiling, it doesn't matter what you think about that water. It's going to boil if you feel good about it, if you feel bad about it, if you like what's happening. Yeah. But when it comes to social phenomena, the way that you think and act towards social phenomena will have an effect on it. So he says that there's basically sort of two aspects to the human actor in social situations. That you have the passive cognitive function, that is really the part of your brain that seeks to understand and analyze the world outside from an objective standpoint, and you have like the active cognitive function that is trying to change the world. Like, you're actively trying to make some outcome come about to attain goals, and these two things will interfere. They happen at the same time, and they will interfere with each other. So your basically will to change the world will actually change social phenomena that you try to understand objectively. And these two things will interface with each other in the form of feedback loops that will either be positive or negative feedback loops. And I mean, it is just a kind of difficult concept to explain. But if you're familiar with the self-fulfilling prophecy, that's basically what it is, right?
Isn't this like a 12 rules for life thing? I feel like the feedback loops is something that Peterson brings up time and time again, but it's been years since I dove into any of his stuff.
He uses the examples of market bubbles, basically.
Yeah.
And I wish I was better at explaining econs, but I mean, from Soros' perspective, like, this reflexivity approach that he has is very contrary to the standard classical economics, where like they try to borrow from more like the sort of Newtonian mathematical modeling of the economy, that where you have kind of an efficient market.
Yeah, that's the sort of the basis for the entire Austrian school.
Yes.
I mean, anyone who's taken economic classes will remember having to sort of like memorize formulas for creating the different graphs of supply and demand, and et cetera, et cetera.
The intersectional graphs, and you have the market that is always moving towards equilibrium. Like, that's the idea. You're moving towards a kind of true state, and sometimes they'll deviate a little bit, but then it'll just go back to the equilibrium. Soros's perception is like the complete opposite. He basically says that like people's perception, the actor's perception of prices is always distorted. Like, it is basically a view of like constant chaos, where nobody has enough information to make good decisions, and like the way they think about things will affect how things turn out. And how like he thinks about, say, like market bubbles, is that they happen if there is a sort of positive feedback loops, where that contains basically a combination of a distortion and a kind of underlying real truth. The example, I mean, it's let's see, the example of housing crashes, basically, or like real estate bubbles.
I would not include the 2008 one, by the way. There's far too much weirdness going on.
There's a lot of weirdness
for being pure economics.
It's usually a lot of the same, a lot of the same ideas from his framework, is that there's a sort of misunderstanding of what's actually happening, where people confuse the model for the real world, basically.
Okay. I was misunderstanding what you were getting at.
I mean,
okay, well then I see.
It's like you basically, when like you create a model to understand the world, and then the metrics in that model become a goal into themselves, and then that becomes just like a self-reinforcing feedback loop.
Well, yeah, that's just modern Keynesian economics.
Yes, but he just says it's basically faulty, and he made his money trying to detect these kind of faulty understandings people have. But getting back to like the standard real estate bubble, is that there's the truth is that, let's say the interest rates are going down, so it's cheap to borrow money, and that makes people buy more real estate because it's cheaper to hold on to the houses, and because more people are buying the houses, the prices of houses are going to go up. And because houses are going up as a kind of investment, and the bankers are more willing to borrow money to people to buy more houses. Like, so this is a self-reinforcing thing. It's like, okay, the more the prices of the houses go up, the more banks are willing to loan, and so there's more credit coming into the market. The prices keep rising up until basically what he says is the fallacy here is that people think that these prices are rising independently of credit. Like the idea that, okay, like this is people, like these houses are just increasing in price. Like housing is just such a great investment. And so you can just keep investing into it. And at some point,
people are memeing, like for a real world example, people are like, there's writing, like locally, there's huge amounts of writing about what the hell is going on in Oslo in Norway, and has been for like the past, I guess, 15 years, with the prices just rising and rising and rising.
Oh yes,
to now like insane levels.
So yeah, certainly yes, but of course it has to do with like the constrained supply as well.
Yeah.
I think Norway is a bit more regulated than the United States, where they can't just come in and build things. But I agree that
either or, it depends on where you are in America. Yes. But yes, part of the reason is the regulation, right? So
it is the regulation, but it's also interest rates, because it's been very low, like the last since 2008.
It's been artificially low because the government places the interest rates, right? So
yes, but I mean, it's been the quantitative easing that's been going on since 2008, where the interest rates have just been at almost zero for a very long time, and then you get the feedback loop, basically, of people buy more properties, and property prices go up, and then banks are willing to borrow more money. And as soon as there's a sort of contraction there, like it's basically going to go up as a sort of self-reinforcing fallacy, until there's a kind of stop period. There's this kind of flattening out of the curve, where people are starting to kind of realize that there's something weird going on. And then there's going to be the feedback loop is going to reinforce in a negative direction, right? As soon as everybody's starting to realize that this price was artificially high, and people start to take their money out, they start selling, they default on the credit, and so it's a kind of slow. The bubble is a sort of slow build up. It has like a phase where it's flattening out, and then it's a fast tunneling down. And in Soros's view, like this is always based on some fallacy that people have. Like there's some people have a misunderstanding of how basically what they're investing in works, or they think that it's some type of variable that's independent for something else. And like his investment strategy is to try to find these cases where people are investing in things where they mistake the model for the reality, or they think that they figured something out, and you get a positive feedback loop. And then at some point, they're just going to have to realize that this is insanity, and it's going to contract very quickly. And his investment strategy then is to, okay, if you see this phenomenon happening, you go long on the build-up, basically. You go long on the positive feedback reinforcement, and then you short the asset on the way down.
Yep.
And he didn't just do it in like a hedged position. I mean, he would just take all of his money and borrow against that money and short it. And like, I think that's why he was just, getting so anxious and had to get out of it. Because let's say you're managing a portfolio of like, let's say like $10 billion or something. And or you see, like, you think there's going to be a bubble. And you borrow 20 billion and you put everything on a short. I mean, if that goes awry, it's basically,
I mean, it's over.
bye.
I mean,
it's all over.
I mean, that is basically what ruined so many people in the 2008 housing crisis, because of all these short positions tanking, basically, and these agencies and fund managing corporations not having the the liquidity to pay those loans back.
I mean, this is I always find this to be a sort of difficult topic to discuss. So just apologies.
It's incredibly complex, and it would require several streams of its own. Luckily, I don't have to do them, because Radlib here on YouTube has done quite a few, like an entire series, I think, on what led to the 2008 housing crisis. You can watch movies like The Big Short, which gives you sort of like a layman's introduction to what happened here, and there's a lot of resources if you really want to dive deeply into this. But I think the core that George Soros is talking about here is something that is worth discussing. But I think I don't think we have to go any deeper than that.
No, it's basically just getting the idea, and it's quite unusual in the beginning, but you see it's all quite logical if you just go you trace it back to the critical rationalism, the open society ideas, and then applying those ideas to social science, and then using that in a sort of financial sense. And I mean, you'll see that as well, like with Soros, with the books and essays that he's written, is that he always goes back to this kind of feedback loop type of argument. Like, that's how he sees the world, basically, as like this series of feedback loops that either, like, you'll have like a regular sort of, the negative feedback loop is like the ideal, that's the equilibrium position basically for him, where there's where people are kind of, okay, you try something and you made a mistake, and then you try again, you change the price a little bit, and you're approaching a kind of efficient point. But like the part that will happen occasionally that he says are the bubbles is when the feedback loops are positive, and people are just putting more and more money into something because they have a misunderstanding of what they're actually investing in. I mean, this is a lot like, say, how you could use this to understand certain ideologies, for instance, or religion. Like, say, with the sort of doomsday cult, with these people who just kind of keep doubling down on their beliefs, like, in spite of evidence, any evidence to the contrary, they just kind of ignore, and they just keep doubling down. They keep doubling down and doubling down on the same belief until a point it becomes just so absurd that it's that people just start leaving it en masse.
I mean, I think about probably like sources on this, but I mean, it has to be like some kind of human characteristic that at some point, if you're balls deep in something enough, just going deeper is easier than doing the work of reversing.
Yes, I mean, but that's where the crash comes in, right? Because you get the correction from the real world, and then you just have to accept it, because the alternative is like, maybe you damage yourself, or you die or something.
Yeah.
So you have to make the correction. You can't just keep doubling down, because there's an actual real world out there that you have to try to work with. So.
I agree.
But like, yeah, you could use it for religion, like with ideologies. I mean, he uses it to analyze like foreign policy. He has there's a book by George Soros that's called The Bubble of American Supremacy, for instance, where he sits and talks about how, like, there's the people believe that the kind of gay empire can go on forever and stuff. Like, he doesn't use that language, but it's really the same thing, that like the gay empire is kind of like a bubble, basically.
Yeah.
Where people think that it can just can go on forever, but at some point it has to crash. And I think, like, say, with stuff like Afghanistan and other situations around the world, like, this is kind of a very quick, it's falling apart.
The cracks are showing,
quite quickly. It's been building up for a long time, and then it's just, when it falls apart and it starts hitting reality, it goes really fast.
what's the Mark Twain? At first you go bankrupt, and then at first you go bankrupt slowly, and then all at once.
Yes, that's kind of. I mean, it sounds like such a fundamentally simple idea, but you see people failing to apply this very consistently. Is that people get lost in trying to use certain models, or like they read a book with a certain framework of how to analyze the world, that you put the world into certain categories without understanding that these categories are somewhat limited, and then you just kind of keep doubling down on
it's
on
why
the nonsense.
as we just discussed earlier, having a toolbox of lenses can help you make sense of these situations more effectively than just having one. Being able to bring out the anti-fascism lens helps explain this, but maybe another one explains another phenomena, right? Because everything can't be true all at once in the same way. That's unfortunately not how reality works.
I mean, there are just many ways to think about this stuff. Where you talk about how like the left have been able to own the right, where they use their own frameworks against them, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like you have people on the right that want to just double down on whether it's some traditional Christian type ethics or the ethno-nationalist stuff, that they just need to keep, like, they can't accept that this frame isn't correct. They need to keep coming up with more elaborate kind of rationalizations for how this works, instead of just like dropping it and realize, okay, it's just a tool, it's just a ladder or a ice pick or something you use to accomplish something. You don't have to live and die by by these models.
No.
All right. So I don't know if there's a lot. There are more slides to go through here. I think we've covered most of it.
There are a couple, but maybe we have covered everything
inadvertently. I think I actually have covered a lot of the stuff I think that's in there, because we're getting to the point. Yeah, with the bubble we've talked about. So I don't know. You could look at the second link there, because you have like a George Soros doing a lecture there where he's talking about like the Open Society project and how like he thinks he's kind of hit a wall with it. He feels like he's not even sure anymore whether the Open Society is actually possible when people are retarded. Like he's a bit more kind of smooth about it.
So Soros realized that the peasants have to be told what to think.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you can just listen to 10 minutes of the second link.
This
there.
The postmodernism one.
Yeah, if people can stand listening to it.
Let's see here. I'm just gonna have.
I mean, he has a lot of lectures put out on the channel that's called like the Open Society on YouTube, and if you can see the dislikes, it's always like more dislikes than there are likes.
I can't see dislikes anymore because I don't have that like extension installed.
I use the extension, but there's like more dislikes than likes, and I mean, this is just people expressing that they don't like the guy, which I understand. But the thing is that the lectures themselves are actually really good. Like, he's very articulate and good at explaining his ideas and what he thinks. And if you just look at it as just like a valuable thing that you could learn something from, this is actually, it's quite informative.
Yeah, you're a lot better at that than I am, because you'll, in our private chats, you'll like send me a link to like some random Wash stream and ask me what I think about it. And I think doing that kind of shadow boxing, I suppose, is valuable. I just have such a low sort of like tolerance for
I mean,
the bullshit that goes on.
Other people in this sphere are much better than me. I think like the Distributist is probably like the best in our spheres at doing that stuff, where he's actually like listening to this stuff and engaging with a lot of the progressive talking points. But like George Soros is surprisingly not cringe. He's very analytic in the way that he explains things, and he's not old enough here to like the point he can speak fluidly. If you listen to him speak now, like when he passed 90, he's just like breathing, and you can just hear the water and the spit around in his mouth, and he has to like take large pauses between every sentence. But he's still quite fluid and articulate here. So just press play.
Bo Gruntman says, "Do you think Soros paid YouTube to remove the rating system?" I don't think so. I think the White House account being systematically disliked had a lot more to do with it.
I I mean, we're going to look in like the next stream on this, on like what projects the Open Society Foundation is actually involved in. I think, stuff like drug legalization, for instance, that's one of the biggest projects that he's been putting money into. But in terms of like removing the likes, I would look to the ADL and like the White House, like as you said, the damage control for Biden and Jen Psaki.
Yeah.
Independently given. It was subject to manipulation by advertising. The theory of representative democracy assumed that candidates would present themselves and their programs, and the electorate would choose the ones they preferred. It didn't anticipate that the candidates would study public opinion and then tell the electorate what it wanted to hear.
Shocker.
It's no shock to us, right? But it's kind of like
funny so far. This is like, have you seen that clip of like this? This Islamic, I think he's like an imam or something, basically calling democracy gay as well. He's basically starting his rant the exact same way. All right, I'll keep playing.
Both these theories failed to take into account that reality can be manipulated.
Get a sip of adrenochrome.
The manipulation of reality also became a major theme in the arts. It was literary criticism that eventually led to the development of the postmodern worldview, which turned the Enlightenment upside down. It denied the existence of an objective reality that could be discovered by reason. Instead, it saw reality as a collection of often contradictory narratives. I had dismissed the postmodern worldview out of hand because it was in conflict with my profound respect for an objective reality. I didn't realize the connection between the postmodern worldview and the Bush administration's propaganda machine until...
Wait, what is he saying here? That
no,
the Bush
I mean,
administration leads to postmodern virtue.
it's virtue. He actually says worldview, but I think it's the translation that's a little bit incorrect on it. But I mean, he just talks about like he was basically blackpilled when like Bush was reelected. Like that's the Bush Jr. basically, and then he said that basically at this point he has almost like no hope that representative democracy can work. Because people are just like the propaganda is too good, and this is like after he's reelected after the sort of Iraq stuff and all of the lies with the going on that stuff. I mean, if he says that if that's not enough for people to elect somebody else, then it's like okay. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a hopeless project. I didn't know it would get this bad, but a lot of the vision that the Open Society is built on, like the idea of that you have people can talk about the objective reality and elect leaders. It's just completely it can't work properly. So I mean, his conclusion is of course that you need to put a lot more emphasis and a lot more work into making people think more objectively. Which, of course, that just manifests as like fact checking, and this sort of that's the painful part of this is that this is like where does the idea of this kind of fact checking and having the discourse kind of pruned with these people that are always trying to ask for sources and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the end result. Listening to him, you can be forgiven for thinking that it's kind of reasonable until you see like what the end result of a lot of these ideas end up as. But I don't know. Yeah, we could listen to a little bit more, and then I think we could close out.
I read an article by Ron Suskind, which opened my eyes. He quoted one of the operators of that machine, supposed to be Karl Rove, as saying that we don't study facts, we create them. This forced me to change my mind. I had to take the postmodern position more seriously and recognize it as a fertile fallacy, fully equal in its influence to the Enlightenment, and currently perhaps even more influential.
I mean, and that's pretty much what he's been doing for the past 12 years, I suppose.
Yes.
He's realized that, you know what, actually I should use this power for my own good.
Well, I mean, in his view, it's really more that you have to socially kind of piecemeal engineers the way people think in order
the people have to be taught how to think.
the system to work, basically. So that's the kind of absurd almost contradiction there, just to maintain or sort of to stop changes of this open society. You have to socially engineer every part.
He's a social liberal reactionary.
Well, they almost become that way. Like you try to just maintain this basic liberal democracy framework, and it becomes so absurd, like the lengths that you have to go to engineer almost every aspect of people's life.
Or Balkan war criminal says that he realized that meme magic is real. I mean, both are valid observations, I'll say.
Yes. But I mean, that's at least something that you can take from this guy, is that he will just admit when he's wrong, at certain points.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you have a lot of these other, like I said, these rich people are just insanely arrogant, and they'll just double down on anything. But he has a surprising, willingness, even though he's on the other side of this, most of the issues that we are. Like he's just, okay, I'm willing to admit that I'm wrong on this and just kind of change my strategy.
But I mean, that would also coincide with, considering how successful he's been in a lot of these projects, I think.
But that's something too. When we go back to the lessons from Soros frame, that's one of them. It's just being able to admit, okay, you were wrong. I was wrong here. And the other thing is to being able to deal with like people not listening to you. I mean, like he is like the ultimate kind of, like, okay, how do you deal with that stuff? Because he tried at first to be a philosopher and nobody was interested in his philosophy. And then he just made kind of a name for himself as the most successful hedge fund manager in the world. But he talks about how like he would go to financial advisors and governments to give them suggestions on policy, and they would just shoot him down. They're just not interested in listening to anything he has to say. So the logical conclusion of that is that he just has to use his tools
to create like an NGO
socially engineer people to like just believe what he believes in. But I mean, it is very much a sort of will to power move there. It's very easy to just sit and he didn't make YouTube videos where he's just complaining about people not listening to him, or he's not getting the credit he deserves or anything. So I mean, if there's one thing that you should learn from him, that would be just stop complaining and actually try to do
make
something.
An NGO.
Yeah, make your own NGO, bro.
Just
I actually think so. I actually
sure,
do think so, that we should try to make NGOs.
That's going to be an uphill battle trying to get that through the.
Yeah, it's not going to be like the Closed Society Foundation. It's it's going to have to be something a bit more subversive. I'm thinking about like having it more focused on like the well-being of certain people, like say like having an NGO that's trying to give legal help to men over 55,
gamers.
Yeah, like the true gamers, the oppressed. But okay, say like
targeting men over 50, something like that.
People who are like reading a lot of these right-wing newspapers, like, and they have some working class job, they work construction, or they work as a bus driver or something, and they get fired because they don't want to wear a mask or take a certain medication. Then you can give them legal help. Like you bring in interns from like law school, so that they can get experience, and you just make these people like help them out in legal cases so they can keep their income. Or you just take some of these demographics that are not, let's say, that are not contested, so to say, like it's not a red flag or a sort of walking target. It looks innocuous, on the front, and it stays optical, but the purpose of it would be to try to help the demographics that support our position keep their jobs and keep influence within their sphere, so they can keep pouring resources into other parts of the machine.
Yeah.
That's at least as far as I've gotten on thinking about that and how that could be done. Because I don't see. It seems like a totally obvious idea. I just don't see that being discussed a whole lot in these circles. How that could be accomplished.
Okay. Let's see here. Someone. Julius 5 says, by the way, Walrus, even though FMAB, do you know what that is? Is good. There are some cringe moments like thinking democracy is the way to go.
Full
Many
Metal
shows
Alchemist
that-
Brotherhood. Is it?
Are we talking about anime again?
They
Can't
still
avoid
want
it.
the
I've
anime.
opened the
Come
floodgates
on,
now.
guys.
Where's the anime episode? Yeah.
No, but it is coming.
It's
Actually,
coming. It's coming. I'm watching anime. I'm doing it, boys. Yeah. I'm trying to
We're
catch
spending
up.
our time productively watching anime for the cause.
So next week there's not going to be any Longhouse because I'm just going to be watching anime.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're going to do multiple episodes actually, where we're going to do some dives into
Yeah, we
different
talked
shows.
about like, just letting people, if you want to talk for 15, 20 minutes or even more about your favorite show, I'm open for that,
Yes, I mean, this is like being in high school or something. Like you got to talk about your favorite band or something. But I mean, I have people I know that are politically adjacent that are, not as active as I am, but they watch anime. And like, I just told them that they can come on and do a 15-minute presentation on whatever anime they want to talk about. We could, get an alias or some voice distortion or something. So I think it would be fun.
Yeah.
That's for the audience as well. If there's anybody who has like a favorite anime show that they want to do a presentation on, just hit us up.
It's certainly an interesting phenomenon. I suppose that's my view on the whole thing. Like, why does this draw so much more, male energy and attention in today's society versus other media? I mean, I can, venture quite a few guesses, but, having that sort of frame of looking at it, like, what is it that we have lost, basically?
Yeah, I think the Japanese have a way of tapping into that the male power fantasy. I mean, I would almost call it pornographic in a sense. Like they're able to do it. I mean, you see, of course, other shows that are taking after that. That seems to be like where the whatever's left of the superhero genre is going now. Like you have like these shows
Maybe,
like the Boys and what's that Invisible. Where they're just getting more and more violent.
The Amazon one. I haven't watched that, but yeah,
it's more kind of anime-like. It's more emphasis on grotesque violence, and a lot more. I would just say a lot more pornographic in how it's presented. But I feel like the anime people figured out how to do that, first.
Yeah, probably. Now Nordanon says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I have watched Spy X Family." Now, Luddic, can I Google that without getting into trouble?
Incognito mode.
Yeah, of course.
I actually don't know.
This looks
don't know what that show is.
Like some sort of like thriller stuff. Oh, hang on. There's a tiny girl and a family. What is this show? What the hell is this? Nordanon, what did you send me into? All right, you can tell me what it's about in the comments.
Nordanon is coming on next time to explain what Spy X Family is and why it's the most based
the family
show.
manga. I found a website that might be an action-packed comedy about a fake family that includes a spy, an assassin, and a telepath. Okay. So is this like, this is the male fantasy and it's just a dude who has a family and he's also like a super spy? Falls a spy who has to build a family to execute a mission, not realizing that a girl he adopts as his daughter is a telepath and the woman he agrees to be in a marriage with is a skilled assassin. This is, what's that movie about with Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Basically. Nordanon hedges himself and says, to be clear, I haven't watched this. Okay. Glow in the Dark says that Spy X Family is wholesome. Well, if it's, you know, a show about a family, I suppose I can understand it. But anime has also a lot of subversive elements, and every time, like when I look at an anime and a picture or like a clip includes like a little girl, my hedgehog spikes are out. I'm looking for danger.
Suspect.
It's sus, as the kids say. Anyway, let me just bring up something real quick here while we wait. And I think we're at the end of the presentation here, and I know that Mr. Prudentialist is publishing a video in like 15 minutes, and then there's a unpopular opinions airing. So we should round this off soon, and then you can all go and tell people watching Popular Opinions to subscribe to Walrus. If you have any
dissident rights entertainment complex.
Yes, if you have anything else you want to pull out of us while we're here, if you want to torture me with more anime stuff, I'm here for 10 more minutes or something. I've also been getting back into running again because the weather has been so nice lately. That's been fun. Hopefully I can do it for longer this time. I usually run into problems with like old injuries flaring up when I run too much, but I actually find it quite enjoyable.
It is something you need to gradually increase, and that's sort of the paradox with that, because like to me, exercise is something that I've kind of almost approached as a kind of drug, where I like to get the high of it's lifting or running or something, but you just damage yourself that way, just like you hurt yourself with drugs. So that's why I'm almost apprehensive about exercising, because it's so boring when you have to be disciplined. You know, you have to quit when it feels good. I don't like it.
Yeah, that's fair. When is the radical left's infatuation with speed running episode? I'm not quite sure what you mean by speed running.
It's like with video games, where you try to complete Super Mario in 50 seconds or something.
That's not a left thing. It's just autism, and it just so happens that autism correlates with transsexualism.
Venn diagram of autism, trans, and speed running.
Yeah, that's very.
We could do an episode
Where
of
can I throw money at you and make you dance like a funny haha seal? Well, I mean, you can't throw physically money at me, but I do have a subscribe star. Or if you tell all your friends to subscribe to me, sooner I hope that I will have access to stuff like super chats, etc.
And we get super chats.
Yep.
That's when we get we're gonna use like OBS and get some sort of haha seal thing every time somebody donates, and you can see it on the screen.
God.
I don't know if you even want to do that stuff, but I see that on a lot of these streams where like every time somebody super chats, they some emoji or some GIF.
I'm not sure if I'm being contained, but when I go to my YouTube thing, it's 1,000 followers. Yeah.
You need 1,000 subs and a certain amount of view time, and then you need to have AdSense and then get your application validated.
Yeah, so there's a lot of hoops. That's also why we're trying to be a little bit careful about what words we do say and what words we don't. Not necessarily because I really need the money, but if I ever want to be monetized and not be like, because once you're monetized, it almost works like, it seems like it works like a throttle if you don't get monetized on a video, because YouTube they don't want demonetized videos.
We don't need to be monetized on everything, but it would be funny if there's some money in circulation. I mean, we could put it into other things and try to like improving the show and so on. I was also thinking if we could do some type of book club concept where I think we just we use some of the money to just buy ebooks or something. We could send these books around to people in the club.
Would you be interested in money from a shady organization that may be tied to the government? Well, I mean, if you give me the initials and how much, I'll consider it. I mean, if it's Peter Thiel money, Peter Thiel bucks for shilling his stuff, I'll consider it. It'll have to outdo my current salary. Anyway, I was looking at my stats now because we talked about the watch hours. We're getting there. I think getting to 1,000 subscribers should enable that stuff. Let's see here. Leftoids could never understand. Set up entropy or similar instead of super chat. Yes, I will do that. And there are things in the works with like shielding stuff as well. That might help with people who don't want to send 30% of the donation to YouTube. So I might look into just setting up an entropy as like as a thing regardless. Streamlabs, it's worth considering. I haven't looked into Streamlabs. Maybe I'll do that too. Let's see here. Well, there's a lot of options, I suppose. Anyway, I think that's it. 2.5 hours, not too bad for semi-impromptu stream.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I decided to do it. Like I said, try to take some cues from BAP and be a little bit more dynamic, as you say. Not have to follow the schedule at every point. Try to be flexible.
How much would the Mossad have to pay you for work for them? I mean,
how much? I mean, what would they make me do in that case?
Yeah, it depends what they would make me do, and you know, I'd at least need to have like a villa, some obscure place on the continent of Europe where I can hide out. I suppose. I think quite a lot. Bingle is also posting some stuff tonight, so you could also head over to his channel if you're interested in more stuff. He's a frequent panelist of this show. Otherwise, for future weeks, we have, of course, the other parts of the Open Society is going to be slotting in at some point. We have to. There's some more setup required, I suppose, for more of the history streams. I'm talking to some potential guests as well, for some interesting episodes. So there might be, you know, we're heading into the summer period. There's going to be vacations and other stuff. So there might be either pre-recorded episodes or maybe a week or two of the Longhouse skipping a week. Just a heads up, but we'll try to work around it as best as possible.
Yes, I don't have anything scheduled, but like I said, I have a kid on the way, so that might take. I don't know how much time that's going to take.
Yeah, of course.
of my schedule, but I mean, like with these shows, when you have a computer, and there is a lot of flexibility with that. So
yeah,
it's not that difficult to pre-record something or
no
to have something.
So
I mean,
we'll
for some people,
something
I think
out usually, but it might not be live every week during the summer holidays. Is all I'm saying. Okay. I think on that note, we should just end it. I'm gonna post the link to Prudentialist's upcoming video. You can raid him, and also remember to watch UO and tell everyone to subscribe to Walrus. Have a good evening.
Good night.